Hi, welcome back to United in Grief with Donna. Today, I'm a little more casual today because today's topic is going to be a doozy. Today, I'm going to talk about the loss of my little brother. And we'll see how I do with this. I'm not sure. Sometimes it's still so painful that it takes my breath away. I want to share this though, because to date, I feel like it was the most life-altering and biggest change in my life, and definitely for my family, it was the greatest tragedy that kind of altered our lives in many ways, each of us differently. So I'm going to do my best, but I want to share this because I know that so many people have shared, so many people have experienced the loss of a sibling, especially a young sibling, and also the loss of a child, which my parents, I know at the time, really struggled with that. So, a little backstory. You see that I'm wearing, I don't know if you can see the whole thing, but it says, "You are my sunshine." So my brother, his name was William Kelly Chance Jr., and he went by his initials, Kelly Chance, KC. So my dad went by Kelly, and they didn't want to call him William, and so my mom decided they would call him KC for his initials. So that was his name, and he was actually before KC in the Sunshine Band, but it kind of associated that with him. But we used to sing to him when he was a baby. We used to sing "You Are My Sunshine" to him all the time. And so that's kind of how we grew up knowing that. So I was 9 years old and my sister was 7 when my brother was born. So we thought that my mom and dad had him just for us, like that he was going to be our little toy, like we were definitely like his second mothers. He used to get teased when he was older because he would go to do something and there would be like a chorus of like everybody correcting him, my sister and I and my mom. And so he grew up with that, but we could not have loved him more if we had delivered him ourselves. Like, we just were enamored by him, and we grew up together, did vacations together, all of that, and just could not have had a more perfect childhood. But because of our age difference, he was in 8th grade when I was graduating from college and moving to New York City for a job. So that's, our age difference was quite significant at that time. But anyway, I went to New York, I lived there for about 7.5 years. My brother, ended up graduating from high school, went to college. He went to a few different colleges, and he went to moved to Colorado at one time, and then moved back. And then my sister, so it was just the 3 of us, 2 girls and a boy. My sister, she had gotten married since, and she was getting ready to have a baby. And so it was going to be like the first niece, nephew, grandchild, all of that. And so I didn't want to live in New York and have my niece or nephew not even know who I was. And so I made plans to move back to New Orleans. And I moved back in 1994. And so because of that, I had job offers. Actually, I was working in the film industry by this time, and I had job offers in California to go and work for a studio there. But I really just wanted to stay close to home so that I could know my niece. And so I moved back to New Orleans. The film industry was taking off there. And my niece or nephew, we didn't know at the time, but she was going to be, she or he were going to be in Lafayette, which was about 2.5 hours from us. And so looking back, like that was 94 when she was born. I moved back that year. And my brother passed away in 1999. And so looking back on that now, had I not moved back, I would have given up those years with him, those 5 years that I would have been living in California or in New York, and I wouldn't have had those 5 years with him. Never in a million years would it have crossed my mind. He was the baby of our family, and so it wouldn't have even crossed my mind that I was going to lose him so young. And so we, enjoyed so many times together. Once my niece was born, her name was Erin, and we would go many times from New Orleans to Lafayette, like every other weekend, to go and see her. And my brother, a lot of times, we used to joke about this because he would go and he and my mom would drive there together, and she would fall asleep if he was driving, and then when they would get to the house, he wouldn't even turn off the car. He would leave the car running and just shut the door really quietly so that he could get in there first and hold Erin before my mom. And so anyway, he was in love with Erin, and as we all were. And so Stacy and Jonathan, my sister and her husband, they asked my brother and I to be her godparents. And we were so excited because not only were we going to be her aunt and uncle, but we were going to be her godparents as well. And so we did the christening and all of that. And we just soaked in like every minute that we could with her. And when she was a little bit older, she was probably about 3 or 4 when my brother transferred to USL. Then it's now University of Louisiana, but it was University of Southwestern Louisiana at that time. And so it was in Lafayette. And so he, transferred there. And so he got to see Erin more often. And it was just a really fun time, I think, for him. Well, he ended up not staying at USL, came back to New Orleans and started going to Our Lady of Holy Cross, moved back in with my mom and dad, so he was living there. And then I guess it was probably maybe a year, the next year, that he said that he had broken his neck when he was in 8th grade and went through a lot of pain, and but thankfully recovered and was able to play sports again. Never football again, but he did play basketball in high school and played golf. My dad started a golf team at his grade school so that he would have another sport to play. And he was very lucky that he survived that injury and was able, it was a diving accident. He dove into a pool that he thought was deeper and hit his head on the bottom and broke I can't remember what vertebrae it was, but they said he was very lucky that he got out of that pool and wasn't paralyzed like from the neck down. But he survived that, overcame it, and then years later, he got in a car accident and it re-injured his neck. And so he started taking pain pills and he got addicted to painkillers. And it was a really unfortunate and hard time. And he came to my parents, and some of his friends had gone into a program where it was like an outpatient program that they were trying to, kick drugs. And so he did that. He went into this program, and there would be a like family night once a week during this outpatient program. And so I, obviously I was living back home, in New Orleans again. And so I would go with them. But I remember when my parents first told me about it, I didn't even, I didn't know. I mean, I had no idea that he had even, had a problem with prescription drugs. And it just led to other things that, I guess in my mind, I was thinking anybody on drugs, they're like stealing and they're, out of their mind all the time. And I just had a lot of misconceptions about that. And I am here to tell you that I was around my brother all the time and I had no idea. So there are things like that you may not notice. And but I thought, what, if he's asking for help, then he thinks it's a problem, and so we need to support him. And so he went through this program, and and then, got out of the program at the end of it. And I think that his counselor, he thought that he probably needed to have more sessions because he thought he could fall back into a point where he still needed help. And so at that time, my brother he didn't go back into it, but he seemed okay. Like, he seemed okay to us. And then this would have been right, I guess, at Christmas that year. This would have been Christmas of 1998. We had, family Christmas, and then after New Year, we, everybody was doing their own thing, going about their business. And then the night before my brother died, several nights before, I guess, he was going on a date. He was all excited about this date he was going on, and went out with his friends and this date. And then the next thing that I know, I had a call. It was times when it was voicemail. There was no cell phones, and so I was sleeping, and it was like 5 or 6 in the morning, and I got a call, and my mom was just like almost hysterical on the phone, and she's like, Casey went by ambulance to the hospital, and we're on our way over there. And I was just thinking to myself, like, I didn't hear the phone ring. So then when I listened to the voicemail, and she said he went to the hospital, and she said yesterday, she doesn't remember that. She didn't remember saying that. But I'm thinking, well, if they're just calling me about it, how bad could it be? So I'm thinking, like, he fell, he has a broken arm, he had lots of broken bones during his life. So that's what I was thinking that it was like he had broken his bone, like broken some bones and had to go have it set or something, or like had an appendicitis or something like that. Never in my wildest imagination did I think that it was life-threatening. So I just gathered my stuff together, because I was like, well, I'll go to the hospital, I'll spend the night so my parents can go home. And I got to the hospital. It was across the river from where I lived. And I got to the hospital, and when I walked in through the emergency, I was thinking he was in a regular room already, because I thought he had been there since the night before. And so when I went, I go up to a phone, like, from the hospital, and I'm trying to ask them what room he's in and get that information. And so in the meantime, like, their system was down, their computer system or something was down. And so the lady was like, I can't tell you right now where he is, or, any information, basically. And in the meantime, I'm standing there on the phone, and my aunt and my uncle, my Aunt Betty and my Uncle Joe, were walking towards me. And so as soon as I saw them, I was like, oh, they probably know where he is. And so I hang up the phone, and I say to my aunt, I was like, I don't know what's happening, but I can't find where Casey is. I know he's in a room, but, I don't know. And then my aunt looks at me, and she's like, oh, honey, you don't know? He's in a coma. And I'm just going to tell you that it was all I could do to walk the 20 steps into the emergency room. He apparently was still in emergency. He had come in that morning. It's like 6 a.m., 7 a.m., which I didn't know. And now it's about 9 or 10, something like that. And when they took me to the room, she basically held me until we got to the room. And I remember walking down that hall, but I honestly, it was almost like I couldn't put my feet in front of each other. But when I saw him on the table, he was on this, on a bed, a hospital bed or whatever, but in the emergency room. So it was one of those gurney type things. And I couldn't even believe it. And I just went and laid down on him. I just laid across him, And I was just like, what did you do? What's going on? What is wrong? What happened? And I'm just talking to him and crying and crying. And his eyes were open just a tiny little bit. And I said to my mom, I was like, he's got something in his eye. There's something in his eye. And it looked like a splinter to me, like a huge splinter. And they got the nurse to come in because I said, I don't want anything to keep him from opening those big brown eyes. If there's something in there preventing him from doing that, I want to fix that. And so they came and took it out, and it was a splinter. Well, at that time, I didn't even know what had happened. I didn't know. But as it turned out, what I learned was that he had gone home after his date. He had gone to a friend of his house, and when he came in, he said that he had a good time and he had a conversation with her, and then he went in the bathroom and she could hear him like coughing, and so she thought that he was like having allergies or coughing up something or whatever, and so it didn't like seem weird to her at the time. And then she heard nothing after that, and so she called 911. It was one of those old type of doors, and so it was really high, and she would have never been able to get the leverage to break this door because it was a giant door and she was tiny. And so she called 911. Apparently someone from next door came over, tried to break into the bathroom, couldn't get in. So then she called my mom and dad. And when she was talking to my mom and dad, she told them that she thought he might be dead. And my mom and dad just jumped up, got in their clothes, and they started going. She thought that they were going to be taking him to, they thought that they were going to be taking him to Charity Hospital because she didn't have any of his insurance information or anything like that. And so that's what she said to my mom and dad. So they just got dressed, got in their car, and were heading there. But in the meantime, the paramedics arrived almost immediately, and they broke down the door. And that's where he got the splinter. But because he was so young and healthy and big, like big strapping guy, they started doing CPR. And apparently once you start with the CPR, they have to try everything. And so when they did the paddles on him, they did get him breathing again, but it was not enough to sustain his life. But they kept him on the breathing machine. And when they were taking him out, he did moan in response to something they said. And so they knew that he, had heard them at least. And he went to the hospital, and unfortunately it was life-threatening, they felt, so they had to take him to the nearest hospital. But unfortunately my parents were at the other hospital waiting and didn't know where he was. And so finally they got an ambulance driver to locate him, and he was at another hospital. So they went there, and they had arrived, and then she called, obviously they had called me. And to say that it was life-altering is kind of an understatement. The next 72 hours was all a big blur, but he was in the hospital. He was not responding. They said that he had a combination of alcohol and painkiller, and he also had a heart murmur that he had had since birth. And there was not enough of anything in his system to kill him, but the combination of the three was life-threatening. And luckily, these paramedics, they got him breathing again and got him to the hospital. But when he got to the hospital, he had been a long time without oxygen to his brain. And so the doctors were not hopeful that even if he came out of the coma, if he wouldn't have substantial brain damage. And so they weren't at that point yet to make that kind of decision. But they just told us that they had to do, numerous tests to see if there was any brain activity. And basically every test that they did, like they do water in the ear and they do a pin on the toe and stuff like that, and he showed no response to any of those things. When they would take him off the ventilator, he would breathe on his own, but it was not enough breaths to sustain his life, so he had to stay on the ventilator. But they said that was not, you didn't want that to be the only sign of life. And so it was a hard few days. And once word got out that he was in the hospital and that he was in a coma, all of his friends started showing up. And we were in Mercy Hospital, which is no longer in New Orleans, but they were very gracious to us. And anybody who showed up, they let them see my brother, even though he was in intensive care. They felt like because he was young and because the hearing, they say, is the last to go, they wanted him to know how many people were worried about him and how many people were coming to see him. And so it was just a constant stream. As a matter of fact, the nurses, they thought that my brother was a professional football player because all of the guys that came in were like these big strapping guys, just like my brother. And so they just assumed he was part of like a professional football team. And so it kind of like we just camped out in the waiting room there, waiting for any news, for anything to change, and to just, I don't know, we were hopeful for a miracle, and we just kept hoping and praying. And we had just thousands and thousands of people praying for him, and we didn't get that miracle. And it's taken me a long time to get to a point where I realize that sometimes even the prayers are not enough. I mean, they're just not enough. And it was a really hard few days for my whole family. We would talk to the neurologist, and they had spoken to my mom and dad the night before, and they said that if his organs, he was being kept alive on these machines, but they said if his organs started failing, that they wouldn't be able to keep him alive. Even the machines would not do that. If the organs start shutting down, then that's the end. And so they said right then he was still a patient in intensive care, and since he was still showing signs of like the breathing, they were going to wait and see if anything changed. And if not, then my mom and dad would have had to make a decision either to turn off the machines or to put him in a long-term care facility where he probably would have, dwindled down to nothing. And I couldn't imagine my parents making either one of those decisions. I don't know how they could have. And I know people do. I know people have to make those decisions. And so I don't take that lightly. But thankfully, in that situation, we did not have to make that decision because my brother's organs did start shutting down. And eventually he did pass away in the hospital. And it was kind of a strange situation where every night that he had been there, there were like 20, 30 of his friends in the waiting room, and family members and friends of our family all in the waiting room. And that last night before he passed away, everybody had kind of gone home for the night and, said they would come back the next day after work or, school or whatever they had. And he passed away at about 6 a.m, but they called us all in there. My mom, we were taking turns sitting in the room, and they called us in there at about, I guess it was like 4 a.m, and they said that, his organs were starting to shut down. And so we were able to our family was all around his bed and singing hymns to him. And one of my favorites, Be Not Afraid, we sang to him. And then we were all just like standing there touching him when he took his last breath. And later, after he passed away, our family wrote a letter to the paramedics because I know in their business, their goal is to save everyone. You know, when they're asked to come to a situation, 911, the goal is to save the person. And so in my brother's case, ultimately they didn't save him because he ended up passing away. But what they did give us is that they gave my family 3 days with him that we wouldn't have had otherwise, and we were able to be with him and holding his hand, and to have all of his friends come and tell him that they loved him. And I know that he heard that. And so to me, I think that helped him be able to let go when he knew he wasn't going to come back. His quality of life wasn't going to ever be the same. And I just feel like that helped him to know that we were all there, and that even though we didn't want to let him go, that he knew it was time to go. And so, like I said, he was 24, and it was life altering. It was a dark, dark, dark time, and everybody grieves differently. And for me personally, I wanted to be there for my parents, because as horrible as it was for me to lose a sibling, and a baby sibling at that, like my brother was like my baby brother, and I was the oldest child, and never in a million years did I think that I would have to know what it was like to lose one of my younger siblings. But my parents lost their only son. They lost a child. I just, still to this day, I can't imagine losing a child. And I know there are people out there, probably, if you're listening and you've lost a child, my heart goes out to you, because I just can't imagine bringing someone into this world and then the order of life not working out the way that it's supposed to, and you having to say goodbye to that child before you. I don't know. And I will say that my parents really struggled with that, with losing a child. And I know that it's something that they carried with them every day since. Like, they have definitely carried his loss with them, as have I. But I will say that I have tried really hard to make something, anything positive come out of that loss. And for me, I think what I gained from it was that I know now that life is short. And I guess I just didn't realize how short it can be, because it never crossed my mind that my brother would die at 24 years old. And so I know now that you have to live every day, every minute of every day you have to live, because you just don't know when it's your time or when it's another one of your loved ones' time. And my brother gave me that. He gave me that gift. So I used to miss things from my family because of work in the film industry. And after he died, I didn't really do that anymore, because I know that the things with my family are the things that are important, and that the movie, I may not even remember what movie it was that was so important that I couldn't go do something with my family. So from that day on, I always would, if I knew something was happening with my family, like a graduation or a birthday or something like that, a special time that my whole family would be there, I always made sure that I told them ahead of time, the movie, that I was going to be gone for that. And I think that it definitely made me appreciate day-to-day things a little bit more. And So going back to after he passed away, obviously, we certainly weren't prepared to, have a funeral for my 24-year-old brother. And so that was a hard time too. We had to, obviously go and plan a funeral for him, and it was huge expense for my dad that they weren't prepared for. And not today, but another day, I will do a talk on the importance of like wills and, not so much for a young person when they die, because you're not ever prepared for that. But it is important for other people, or at least to know their wishes. But when my brother left us, the grieving was so debilitating. There were days that I literally couldn't get off of the floor of my apartment, and I just cried and cried and cried until I felt like I just had nothing left to give, nothing left to let out. And when I would go to my family, to my parents' house, I wanted to be strong for them because they had just lost a child. But everybody was grieving differently. My sister, my niece was only 5 at the time when Casey died, and she was close to him because he was her uncle and her godfather. And it was just a really difficult time, and everybody was grieving differently. So my sister had to pretend like nothing was really wrong for my niece because we didn't want her to, be sad or just see everybody sad. And it was interesting to see, like, at his funeral, at his visitation, that my niece, Erin, she wouldn't go in the room. Like, she could see him in the coffin, but she wouldn't go in the room because she knew in her little brain at 5 years old that something about that wasn't right, that he was too young. And not too long, 2 weeks to the day, actually, 2 weeks to the day after my brother died, my grandfather, he had gone into the hospital right after, was 84 years old and, in fairly good health at that time. He had congestive heart failure, but he had been doing okay. But at my brother's visitation, he just sat in front of his coffin and he was like, I'm 84, he's 24, where's the sense in that? And he just kept saying it over and over. And about 3 days or 4 days after my brother's funeral, he went in the hospital with congestive heart failure and was in ICU. And he was in there for, I guess, a week and a half. And 2 weeks to the day after my brother died, I was sitting with my grandpa, and my aunt had been there earlier. No, my mom had been there earlier, and my aunt was going to be taking over for me at midnight. And it was probably around 10 o'clock, and my grandpa, he kept doing this in front of his head, like just looking up, and he was moving his hands, and I didn't know. I thought maybe it was like a cobweb or something. I wasn't sure. And so I was like, Grandpa, what is it? What's in front of you? And he said, I see Casey, and he's calling me. And I said to him, I was like, well, you tell my brother that I said to shut up, because there is no way that we are ready to let go of anybody else right now, so he can just go on his way. And my aunt came 2 hours later to take my place, and my grandpa didn't mention it again. But when she got there at midnight, I wasn't even to my house when she called. The nurse called, actually, and said that my grandpa had taken a turn for the worse and that we should come back. And when we arrived, he had already passed away. And so within 2 hours of him telling me that my brother was calling him, he was gone. And as much as that made me sad to think like that my brother was calling him and getting him to go to heaven with him, it also comforted me to know that maybe he was there waiting for him, holding out his hand and ready to give my grandpa a big hug. And I have thought about that often since. My grandpa had suffered a lot of losses in his life. He lost his first grandchild when she was just an infant baby, a few days, not even a week old. He lost a second grandson. He had lost a daughter at age 21. She died of a brain tumor. He then lost his wife, and they had been together forever, and then lost another daughter to breast cancer, and then lost my brother. And I felt like if anybody could die of a broken heart, my grandpa died of a broken heart. It just, I don't know how one person survives that kind of loss that many times. And so I think in his situation, he was ready to go. He was tired of saying goodbye to people he loved, and he was ready to go and be with all of them in heaven. And after he died, I feel like we were still kind of in shock over my brother. We, certainly in 2 weeks' time, we certainly hadn't come to terms with that, and then had to say goodbye to my grandpa right on top of that. And it was just a really difficult time. And as I mentioned, I really believe that you don't get over grief. I don't think you can get over that kind of loss, especially the loss of a child, the loss of a sibling, the loss of a parent. I don't think you can get over that. I think that you can, though, learn how to move forward with that grief. It's like it's something you carry with you, and you'll probably always carry it with you. And in the beginning, I wasn't sure. I didn't know how to go on without my brother, because it didn't make sense to me that our family was being disrupted, that one of our family, our immediate little family, was ripped from us before his time. And I just didn't know how I was going to go on from that. And there were days that I would just kind of survive minute by minute, hour by hour, then day by day. And there were days that I was like, that's okay. Like, it's okay. I can remember times when I literally would sit in front of an alarm clock, and I would just watch it go from 1 minute to the next minute. And I would say, okay, I made it to that minute. One more minute. And I would sit there for a long time and look at that. And that was one of the reasons I think that it made me start this channel, because there were nights where I would lay down and I would literally like replay this kind of like this videotape of everything that happened from the time that I got the phone call about my brother, and go through every single thing until we buried him. And it was like this tape that it just kept playing over and over and over, and I could not go to sleep. I would just try and close my eyes, and even if I took some kind of sleep medicine or anything, it still wouldn't help. I would just stay awake. And so at the time, there was no YouTube, certainly, and internet was fairly new. I had just gotten my first computer, and got my first email. And so there was, on this brand new computer, there was a free cell game that it's like a card game and a solitaire game. And I would play those games until 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning, sometimes because it was mindless and I just would do it until I physically couldn't hold my eyes open anymore. And then by the time I would go to sleep, the sun's coming up, and but I could go to sleep, and I would do that night after night. And had there been a channel, a YouTube video that I could watch, or even a TV show or anything like that, I think that it would have helped me to just be able to hear somebody talking directly to me, and I may have gained something from that. But there was no such thing back then. And so I hope that by me sharing stories, and as I mentioned in the introductory video, we won't always think the same about loss and about moving forward with grief. But I will talk, I just kind of wanted to get this one out there because, like I said, this was the most traumatic and life-altering loss for me, the loss of my brother. And so I wanted to put this one out there so that you would understand in the future where I'm coming from, and the depth of loss that I've experienced. And there are other ones that I'll share that were also significant, but this one I wanted to share today. And I think in the next video I may talk about things that people said to me when my brother died, that honestly, sometimes I don't know what people are thinking when they say things to you after someone dies. But we'll talk about that. I will, mention some of the things that were said to me, and maybe go through some things that could have been said but weren't, and things that you shouldn't say to anybody who's had a loss. But we'll get into some of those in another video. But I just hope that you've taken something from the loss that I suffered with my brother. And I just realized I'm sad because right where I am, I actually don't have a picture of him to show you, but I have one in the other room. So maybe I'll put a picture of him in the descriptions, in the comments below, and you can check out my handsome brother. And like I had mentioned, we used to sing to him, "You are my sunshine." So we are very partial to sunflowers, and at his funeral we actually sang "You Are My Sunshine," and it was our last time that we got to sing it to him. And he had a standing room only funeral where people were hanging out the doors, and it was an amazing tribute to his life. And we still go to his grave. We have he's buried at West Lawn Cemetery in New Orleans, and we still go there. He's buried in the same tomb with my grandma and grandpa Chance, and where I will one day be buried. And my mom is also buried there, and I'll share that story at a later date about my mom's death. But anyway, I promise that I always will end with a quote or a poem or something like that. And so this is a poem called "Remembering," and it was written by Elizabeth Dent from the Compassionate Friends McMinnville, Oregon chapter. And if you don't know about the Compassionate Friends, it's an organization that deals with people who have either lost children or lost siblings. They kind of break up into two little subgroups or whatever. And my mom and I were members of the one in New Orleans after my brother died, and it was very helpful to me. And their motto was, "Mourn not the cocoon, for the butterfly has flown." And that's why you'll see butterflies back there. They're always special to me because I love that. I love that sentiment, because I do believe that our loved ones have flown on to bigger and more beautiful things. So this is Remembering by Elizabeth Dent. Go ahead and mention my child, the one that died, you know. Don't worry about hurting me further. The depth of my pain doesn't show. Don't worry about making me cry. I'm already crying inside. Help me to heal by releasing the tears that I try to hide. I'm hurt when you just keep silent, pretending he didn't exist. I'd rather you mention my child, knowing that he has been missed. You asked me how I was doing. I say pretty good or fine. But healing is something ongoing. I know it will take a lifetime. And I truly, truly believe that grieving and healing is an ongoing and lifelong process. And my heart goes out to anyone who has suffered tremendous loss, because I do know that it's a hole in your heart that won't ever truly be filled. But my hope is that you can partially fill it with some of the memories of your loved ones and keep on living and keep on trying to move forward, because that's all we can do until we're all together again one day. So until next time, know that you are not alone, because we are united in grief. See you on the next one.
You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away. The other night, dear, when I lay sleeping, I dreamt I held you in my arms. When I awoke, dear, I was mistaken. So I hung my head and cried. You are my sunshine,